Hi, I'm Luna. This is our first Intro to Yoga class within this series. And it's about exploring Tadasana, mountain pose. And it's about finding the aspects of Tadasana in different poses within the practice and in the classes that we'll be taking. So this one will be about finding neutral in your pelvis specifically, what's going on with the pelvis and how that affects the rest of the body. And the reason why this is important is so that we can bring more awareness to the practice, so that we can be more mindful with how we're moving our bodies in space and how we're holding our bodies in space, not only on the mat, but also in your daily life. Just being mindful of different things that your body might tend to do that you might not even notice, that might be aggravating your body, especially with the pelvic tilt and what's happening in your spine. And these particular poses, the neutral pelvis and Tadasana and poses stemming from Tadasana, they're poses that really help with your posture. So again, coming back to recognizing maybe how you're holding your body in space off of the mat, then how we can bring more awareness and mindfulness in how we're moving our bodies and holding our bodies off of the mat in the world, so that we can find more support and more comfort in our bodies, more strength and stability and mobility in our bodies. So from this place, we'll get started. I'd recommend having 2 blocks nearby, something of that sort. If not, no worries. You can practice without them, but they might help us find a little bit more awareness in the body. And then we're going to get started sitting on our shins like I am, but I'll just pivot to the side now. And we're going to sit on a block. Maybe you've got a folded up blanket or a bolster instead, or multiple pillows instead, but we'll sit on something underneath our hips just so that we're not so intense on the knees. And then lift yourself up and really move your knees together. And then lower your hips back down onto that block. And it could be any height. It could also be middle height like this. It could even be the 2 blocks stacked on top of one another. So let it be as comfortable as you can make it. I know this is something that our bodies aren't really used to doing, right? We're always like kind of sitting in like cars, desks, couches. We never really have this deep of a bend in the knees. So take care of your body and do what feels better for you with this variation. But once you find your variation of this sitting on your shins, we're just going to be thinking about what's happening in your pelvis and your hips right now. So you can even have your hands on your hips with your fingers on the frontal hip bones and your thumb in the low back, and then try to pull, like use your thumbs to push your pelvis forward, and your fingers are kind of pulling back in space. So you're leaning forward in space. So we're overly arching the low back. We've got this like big arch happening, big back bend, and then do the opposite. So use your thumbs to push down with your low back, your sacrum, and lift your frontal hip bones up. So now we're overly rounding in the low back. And then do that a couple more times. So leaning forward in space, overly arching, leaning back in space, overly rounding, and then do that once more. So you're rocking forward and back. And go slow, take your time. So just really being mindful of what's happening with your pelvis. And then we're going to try to find neutral. So we're trying to find the sitting bones, those 2 bony parts at the base of your pelvis. And we're trying to ground them straight down to the floor. So notice, are you leaning slightly forward? Everyone tends to do something a little bit different. Most of the time, people lean forward, but also there's definitely a lot of people that lean back. So it's really about finding your neutral place of where you are. My body loves to lean forward because I live in a very flexible body. So I need to think about lengthening the low back more so that my sitting bones are grounding straight down through the floor, and instead of leaning forward in space. Some of you might need to lean forward a little bit to find your neutral. So we're neither leaning forward nor back. Instead, we're grounding straight down through your sitting bones. Pretend like your sitting bones are like your feet of your spine, because they are. And then from that place, think about lifting through the crown of your head. You can imagine like there's a little imaginary string gently pulling the tippity top crown of your head all the way up to the ceiling. So you feel this grounding down and this lifting up. And then just allow the shoulders to roll down your back so your chest feels open. And be here for a couple of breaths. Really feeling the grounding through your sitting bones. And when you feel that, you should be finding a little bit of activity in your core muscles. So there's just a little bit of a lifting of the frontal hip bones towards the ribs, a little bit of toning of your core muscles. This is not anything hard or intense. There's just a little energetic waking up in your front body, which is great. We need the core to help support the spine. All right, and then go ahead and root your palms to the floor. You can move your block to the side. And then we'll find tabletop position. So the shoulder heads are stacking right over the wrists. Spread your fingers, root your palms down. Your knees are hip distance apart. And maybe actually let's straighten one leg back behind us just to clear out that knee. That was a long time when we were generously bending the knees. And then just switch. Great. And then come back into tabletop position. So we want the hips over the knees, the shoulders over the wrists. Arms are straight and strong. And then we're going to do that same thing with the pelvis that we just did when we were sitting on our shins. So think about lifting your tailbone up to the ceiling. So the pelvis is kind of pouring forward and down to the floor. We're overly arching the low back. And then do the reverse, the opposite. Now reach your tailbone down to the floor. So we're overly rounding the low back and move the frontal hip bones towards the ribs. And then do that 2 more. Inhale. So it's like a little cat-cow if you know this, but it's really more about what's happening with your low back. Inhale, the tailbone flares up. We overly back bend. And then exhale, the tailbone reaches down and we're rounding in the low back, rounding, rounding, rounding. So now we're going to try to find a neutral place between the two worlds. So think about reaching your tailbone, your sitting bone straight back behind you. So no lifting up, no rolling down, straight back. And then from that place, that same awareness of the core, so the frontal hip bones are just very gently moving towards your ribs, like towards your lower abdomen, your ribs. And then you feel that gentle, little, almost like a very gentle kind of corset action happening of your low back supporting. Great. And then once you feel that support, we're going to reach the left leg straight behind us. And you can tap the toes to the floor for a moment. And just notice, did your tailbone flare up? Did it roll down? Can you continue to keep that neutral pelvis? So you're lengthening your low back. And then from that place, maybe you lift your left leg off of the floor an inch or 2. Notice, did your left hip lift up to the ceiling? Can you wrap your outer left hip down so it stays in alignment with your right hip? And you're really lifting from the inner left thigh. Frontal hip bones towards the ribs still. So there's a nice awareness of the core muscles happening. And then lower your left foot down, bend your left knee, lower your left knee down. And then switch. Straighten your right leg behind you. Your arms are straight and strong. Notice if your tailbone is flaring up. Is it rolling down? Can you find the connection of the core? So frontal hip bones towards the ribs a little bit more and your low back is long. And maybe the right foot lifts like a centimeter. Can you keep the frontal hip bones towards the ribs? Maybe your right leg lifts a little bit higher. Notice if your left hip is poking out to the side, hug it in. We want to try to keep the hips exactly how they were as we lift the leg. So there's more awareness in the core and the lengthening of the spine. And then lower your right foot down, bend your right knee. Go ahead and move your feet together. Rest your hips onto your heels, your forehead to the floor. Take a moment just to soften. This is our child's pose, just letting go for a moment. Softening from that work. And then go ahead and find tabletop position again. Tuck your toes under, lift your hips up and back just for a very gentle down dog and walk, walk, walk. Your hands all the way back to your feet. All the way back, all the way back. Bend your knees a good amount. Maybe even your ribs rest onto your thighs and just hang heavy towards the floor. Maybe a little sway from side to side. Just softening for a moment in a forward fold. And then bend your knees a lot and slowly round yourself all the way on up to standing. Roll the shoulders down to your back, open your chest. And then you're going to walk forward to the front of the mat. All right, so from here, we're going to explore Tadasana, mountain pose. You'll want your feet hip distance apart so that they're tracking underneath the sitting bones, the hips, and they'll be more supportive and more spacious for your body. And then just look down at your feet. So the tendency is for the toes to be out and the heels to be in. Just the tendency. Everyone is different, again. But most of the time, this is what the body wants to do because it's kind of just easier for the body to hang out like this. But that tends to compress the low back. So you want to think about your toes straight forward in space. So if you look down at your feet, you want like the middle of your heel and the middle of like your 5 toes on each foot to be straight forward in space. In the middle of the foot, there's a line down the straight up middle of your foot. It would reach straight forward in space. That's going to allow this kind of chain reaction to happen with the alignment of the feet forward. Then the knees and the hips will also be forward in space. That'll help find the structure of the body, the support of the body. So once you notice what's going on with the feet, then pick up the toes, spread them wide, and ground down through your whole foot. And just notice the tendency to roll to the outer foot or the inner foot. So being mindful of grounding down through the entire foot. Think about the inner heel, the outer heel, the inner big toe ball mound, the outer big toe ball mound. And then really ground down through those 4 corners of the feet. And then feel a little energetic lifting up from your arch of the foot. So there's no collapsing down. There's this energetic, as we ground down through the 4 corners of the feet, an energetic lifting through the inner arch, which really helps find the support of your feet, which affects the rest of the body, that chain reaction. And then continue going from the ground up. Can you find the strength of your legs by the kneecaps lifting up and the quads lifting up? So feeling the strength of particularly the front of the legs. And just being mindful if you tend to lock your knees or hyperextend, moving them like straighter than straight back in space. So there's this little micro bend of the knees happening. So we're not locking in the joint and instead trying to wake up the muscles in the body, the kneecaps and the quads lifting up. And then a big key is what's happening with your pelvis. So notice if one hip is maybe forward in space than the other. Right? Trying to have the hips in alignment with one another. I like to think of like headlights of a car facing straight forward. They're on the same plane. And then notice what's happening with your pelvis, like we did when we were sitting, like we did when we were on tabletop position. Notice if the tailbone is flaring back and up, which is my tendency. Some might be yours. Maybe you're overly rounding in your low back. The tailbone is like hooking forward in space. We want to try to find an equal point between the two worlds. You can even have hands on the hips like we did earlier, fingers forward and the frontal hips, thumbs back to the sacrum. And then just play around with lifting the frontal hip bones up and then reaching the tailbone back. Frontal hip bones up, tailbone back. And then try to find an equal standing point so that there's no flaring back, no overarch of the low back, more lengthening of the low back. We're trying to find the natural curves of the spine. So the lumbar spine, this low back goes in towards your body. The thoracic spine, the upper back goes out, and then the neck area pulls in a little bit as well. We're trying to find the natural curves. So as we lengthen the tailbone down to the floor, just like we did when we were sitting on our shins, notice how there's a little bit of activity of the core, which is great. We want that. So the same key of the tailbone reaching down, the same thing is the frontal hip bones lifting up, right? Tailbone down, frontal hip bones up. So from that place, we can keep the length of the spine of the low back, find the support of the core. Great. Keep that. And then notice what's going on with your shoulders. We're kind of going up levels, up and up and up. Notice what's happening with the shoulders. Are they kind of hunching forward like the body tends to love to do? Right? Can you roll the shoulders up and then back and then down. There's no like pulling down, but there's just a little kind of a softening of rolling back and down. So your chest feels really open and free. And you can imagine like there's like water pouring over your shoulders, and it would pour evenly forward and back. So if you were like this, it would pour way more back, right? Really finding that kind of neutral place, just like the pelvis. Not rolling forward, not overly doing this back bend thing. We're just finding this neutral place. And it might feel weird for you because your body might tend to do a specific thing all the time. And this is great. We're just waking the body up and playing around with how we can hold it in space so it's truly proper, finding more support in the body. All right, so we've got the shoulders down. And then notice what's happening with the neck. Are we jutting the chin out, which tends to happen when we're on a computer a lot? Are we like doing a weird like chin up situation? You know, everyone's different again. So you might have to push your chin back a little bit so that the tippy top crown of the head is in alignment with your tailbone. So your spine is this one long line of energy, lifting up, grounding down, lifting up. And then allow your palms to be facing forward. The palms facing forward, this is an external rotation of the arms. So the arms are rotating away from the center line of your body. That is going to help you open your chest more. So notice when your hands are in, our body wants to round. When the palms are open forward, the inner elbows are opening forward, we find space across the chest. It's going to encourage that same work of the shoulders. And then just be here for a moment in Tadasana. So go back to the feet. What's happening with the feet? What's happening with the legs? What's happening with the pelvis, the spine, the shoulders, the lifting through the crown of the head, the lengthening of the neck. And be here for a couple of breaths, just noticing how you feel. It might feel quite different than how you normally hold your body in space. It might feel quite the same. Either way is fine. We're waking the body up. Great. And then from this place, we'll kind of explore within each pose that we move into little aspects of Tadasana here. And then I just want to do one more thing with blocks for Tadasana. So if you've got them, great, use them. If you don't, no worries. You'll just imagine like you've got the blocks. You're going to bring one between the inner thighs, which is kind of skinniest width between the inner thighs. Again, feet are hip distance, right? And then grab the other block between your palms, so this lengthwise, and you're kind of mimicking the block forward in space. And then first and foremost, notice what's happening with your feet. Look down. Are the toes slightly in, heels slightly out? Are you spreading through the toes and grounding through the whole foot? And then are you engaging the legs and feel the block being hugged by your legs? It's great. You're waking up the quads, the inner thighs. And then just notice what's happening with the sacrum, the low back. Can you find neutral? What is happening with the hips? Is one hip wrapping forward or back? Can you lengthen your low back and keep the hips in alignment with one another? Low back is long, core is working. Keep that. Shrug your shoulders down your back. So we're finding Tadasana in the body except for the arms right now. From the arms, the inner elbows are spiraling up to the ceiling. It's that external rotation of your arms, which is going to help you open your shoulders and your upper back, your chest. And then very slow motion, you're going to lift your arms up towards the ceiling. So this is Urdhva Hastasana in Tadasana. This is arms, hands raised in Tadasana. And this is a great blueprint for like a lot of other poses that we'll explore, like a downward facing dog. So we're reaching the hands up, handstand if you ever want to get there. We're reaching the hands up. And as you reach your hands up, they don't have to be right above your head. That's fine. They can be slightly forward, especially if you have tighter shoulders. But your arms are working. They're straight and strong. And then just like the knees, notice if you're hyperextending, which my body loves to do. So a little micro bend of the elbows. We're not hyperextending. We're not moving straighter than straight. The low back is long. And then notice when you reach your arms up, did you lose Tadasana in the rest of your body? Can you keep the low back long, the support of your core, the lengthening through your spine, the shoulders being soft? And then reach your arms forward. Lower that block to the floor, both blocks to the floor. And then we'll be at the top of the mat here. We'll do a little bit of flow, a little bit of movements to warm up the body so that we can explore kind of larger poses, standing poses. So the feet are hip distance apart. And then, again, look down. You always want to do this, what's happening to the floor, and then lifting all the way up. Understanding what's happening from the ground up with each pose, with each movement. So finding Tadasana, mountain pose. And then inhale, reach your arms up, just like we did with the block, but now we don't have the block. Lift up. Your low back is still long. The core is working. Exhale, fold over your legs. Bend your knees a little bit. Reach your arms wide and just fold forward. And then inhale, come up halfway. And as you come up halfway, grab hold of those blocks. This should be kind of near your front body. And bring them to the highest height. Bring your palms onto the blocks. Okay. So Ardha Uttanasana, this is a half forward fold. Here, it's kind of similar to the tabletop position we did earlier, right? So notice, and you can bend your knees. Absolutely. If you have tighter hamstrings, bend your knees a little bit. Notice, are you rounding in your low back? If you have tight hamstrings, that's usually the case. Notice, are you flaring your sitting bones up to the ceiling and overarching your low back? If you're in a bendy body, that's usually the case. So we're all working towards neutral. That might mean that we're doing different things, right? Depending on your body type. None of them are better or worse body types. That's not a thing. But it's your unique body type so you can figure out what's happening. So again, notice you can bend the knees. What's happening? Tailbone up, tailbone down. Can you reach the tailbone straight back to the back of the room? Can you feel a little movement of the frontal hip bones towards your ribs? Your core is working. Can you feel your chest pulling forward in space, the shoulders shrugging down in space? We're not rounding, right? We're not hunching. We're feeling the opening of the front body of the chest, just like Tadasana, mountain pose, and you're lengthening through the crown of your head. So this is very similar to Tadasana, right? We're just hinging at the hips. We're in this kind of half forward fold situation, but we're lengthening the low back. We're feeling the same Tadasana in the legs, same Tadasana in your torso, right? All the way through the crown of your head. All right, and then fold over your legs. You can just move the blocks to the side. Keep them near the front of the mat. Fold forward. Inhale again. Come up halfway. Bring your hands to the shins this time. Bend your knees. Can you feel that Tadasana lengthening of the spine? And then exhale, lower your hands to the floor and step your left foot way back. Tap your left knee down. Keep your back toes tucked under. Have the right knee over your right ankle. And already look, are your right toes kind of pivoting in or out? The right toes are straight forward in space, right? Just like Tadasana, we're still there with the foot. And then sweep your arms forward and up into a low lunge. Anjaneyasana. All right, so we want the right knee stacking over the right ankle. So being mindful of that, you might just sneak the right foot back or the right foot forward. The knee is right above the ankle. And then just notice the tendency is to kind of lean forward in space a lot. Try to pull yourself back a little bit. And then we're trying to feel that neutral pelvis. So actually bring your hands to your hips. And then with your fingers on the frontal hip bones, the thumbs to the low back, can you actively pull the frontal hip bones up and lengthen the tailbone down? And then the tendency here is for the left hip to wrap back to the back of the room. Can you, with your left hand, wrap your outer left hip forward? And with your right hand, pull your right hip back so that your hips are in alignment with one another. One is not back or forward of the other. They're in alignment. Great. And then once you find that, feel the legs pulling towards one another. That'll help support you. Find balance as you reach your arms up. And then remember the palms that we're holding onto the block. Can you energetically really strengthen your arms and lift through your fingertips? So again, tailbone is straight down, not curling forward, not flaring back, straight down. And the fingertips are lifting straight up. There's this long line of energy. And then lower your hands to the floor. Hooah. Go ahead and tuck the back toes under, engage your back leg, and step back, finding downward facing dog. All right, give yourself a moment in down dog. So your hands are shoulder distance. You're spreading your fingers wide and pressing through your entire palm, just like we do with our feet, right in their toes. And then feel the external rotation of your arms. So like we did in Tadasana, in Hasta Tadasana with the arms raised, can you spiral your inner upper arms up to the ceiling, the biceps up to the ceiling, and the outer upper arms, the triceps down to the floor? That action is going to help you open into your upper back. And then you're melting your chest towards your legs and lifting your hips up and back, and you're absolutely welcome to bend the knees a little or a lot to take the hamstrings out of the equation. But even here, think about like what we found in that half standing pose, Ardha Uttanasana, half forward fold. Notice if your tailbone is flaring up to the ceiling. Is the tailbone rounding down to the floor? Can you reach the tailbone like one long diagonal line from the crown of your head to like the back kind of top corner of the room behind you? So you're continuing this diagonal lengthening happening. And then inhale, lift your right leg up and back. Exhale, step your right foot where your right thumb is. All right, this time we're going to keep the left knee lifted. You can bring your hands to your front thigh for some more support, and then press your torso straight and bend your left knee a good amount. So the right knee is tracking right over the right ankle. This is called our crescent pose, our kind of high lunge situation. So now that you feel supported, bring your hands to your hips. Right knee is over the right ankle, right toe straight forward like we've been doing. With your hands on your hips, wrap your left hip forward, your right hip back so they're in alignment with one another. And then can you push the sacrum, the tailbone down, the low back down, and lift the frontal hip bones up. So you're using your hands to find a neutral pelvis, just like Tadasana pelvis. And then just maybe you move your left leg a little bit straighter and stronger. Maybe not, that's fine too. But you're feeling a nice stretch in the front of your left thigh, psoas, hip flexor, which is great to help find space in your hips to ultimately support and lengthen your spine. And then if you feel stable, you'll reach your arms up to the ceiling. Just one more inhale. This is our crescent pose. And then exhale, release the hands to the floor. And step your left foot forward. So your feet are hip distance apart at the top of your mat. Inhale, come up halfway, bend the knees a little bit. Can you feel the lengthening of your spine from the tailbone to the crown of your head? And then exhale, fold over your legs. Inhale, reach your arms all the way on up. Palms touch, gaze is up. Exhale, palms together in front of the heart. This is a variation of Tadasana, Samasthiti. It's our equal standing pose, balancing the left and the right side of the body. It helps continuing to open the chest and feeling the lengthening of the spine. We'll do that again, switching sides. Inhale, reach your arms up. Can you still feel Tadasana in your body as your arms lift up? Exhale, fold forward, bend the knees a little bit as you fold forward. Inhale, come up halfway, lengthening the spine from the tailbone to the crown. And then exhale, step your right foot way back and tap your right knee down. Keep your back toes tucked under. Once you feel ready, you'll lift your arms up just for a beat in your low lunge, Anjaneyasana, and then just bring your hands to your hips. And then try to find your neutral pelvis. So for me, my tailbone likes to flare back, which overly arches my low back. My right hip likes to wrap back, so my left hip is wrapping forward. So trying to find the neutral. So most of us will have to pull the left hip back, wrap the right hip forward, and then can you lengthen your low back, tailbone down, and lift your frontal hip bones up. It's a lot of work, but it's waking up all like the little core muscles in the lower abdomen. It's waking up the muscles along the spine. It's going to help you find more support and strength in your entire body. And then once you feel stable with what's happening with your pelvis, we'll reach the arms up. And I will say nothing's ever going to be perfect. We're just moving in the direction of a neutral pelvis. Perfect doesn't exist, right? So just feeling out your own body in space, moving towards neutral and waking the body up. So we're always working a little bit within every pose. And then you'll lower your hands to the floor. Lovely work. Tuck the back toes under, engage the back leg, step back, downward facing dog. And then hang in down dog. Spread the fingers wide, press your palms down. Can you feel that external rotation of the upper arms? Inner upper arms up, outer upper arms down. Then we're melting the chest to the legs. And yeah, the heels are going towards the floor, but just go really easy on yourself. It's not about necessarily touching the floor. It's just about lengthening the back of your leg. So if you are feeling a stretch, that's great. You're doing it. Inhale, lift your left leg up and back. So we can exhale, step the left foot where the left thumb is. And then just be mindful. Left knee over your left ankle. Back knee can have a little bend of it, but it's moving towards straight. And then bring your hands to your front thigh like a little kickstand. And then press down through your hands to lift your torso upright. And then bend the right knee a little bit more. It'll really help you find what's going on with the low back. Hands back to the hips like we've been doing. What do you need to do? Probably pull the left hip back and the right hip forward. Probably reach the tailbone down, the sacrum down, and the frontal hip bones up. And then try to keep that as you reach your arms up. So can you feel that hasta and tadasana, the tadasana with the arms raised above our head here in this pose? Arms are lifting, low back is long, and the right leg is moving towards straight as long as you can keep your low back long. One more inhale here. And then exhale, release your hands to the floor. Step your right foot forward. Feet are hip distance apart. Inhale, come up halfway. Bend your knees as much as you need to truly lengthen your spine from the tailbone to the crown. And then exhale, fold over your legs. Inhale, reach your arms all the way up. And exhale, palms together in front of the heart. And just bring your hands to your hips. We're going to step the left foot back. And we're going to explore Warrior One. Warrior One is interesting because we're moving towards a neutral pelvis, but it's never going to be exactly there. And it's a very hard pose, I will say right now. So you're just going to feel it out as you go. I will say we're moving in the direction of a neutral pelvis. So your feet, you've got a long stance happening, like maybe like a leg's distance apart from your heels, pretty long stance. And then we're finding that front foot straight forward in space, just like Tadasana. And then you want your back heel either in alignment with your right heel. So like if there's an imaginary line down the mat, your heels would touch that same line. I like to practice myself with my right foot open to the right with the feet hip distance like we've been working on and the left heel to the left. So instead of you're walking on a tightrope, you're walking on railroad tracks, your feet are hip distance apart like we've been exploring. Okay. Once you figure that out, you can straighten this front leg for a moment while we're playing around. You're going to pivot the left toes forward. So it's like a 45-degree angle forward in space, like towards the front left corner of your mat. Right toes are straight forward in space. Hands on hips like we've been doing. And then already, notice how the left hip wants to sway back. Think about wrapping the outer left hip forward, but keep grounding through the outer edge of your left foot and keeping your left leg strong. And then think about pulling your right hip back. You can use your hands to pull the right hip back a little bit, left hip forward, but still the back leg is strong. And then notice, are you overly arching? Are you rounding? Can you find that neutral, towards neutral pelvis? So we're lengthening the low back, actively lengthening. So the tailbone straight down, and then you're feeling that little awareness of the core muscles, right? The frontal hip bones lifting just gently towards your ribs. And then from all of that, bend your front knee. Warrior Two. And then just notice, Warrior One, rather, Warrior One. Just notice if the knee passed the ankle. Totally fine. That just means you need to lengthen your stance a little bit more. So the knee does not pass the ankle. Otherwise, that would be too much weight on the joint of the knee. Not safe, not healthy. We want to have the knee right above. And then still with the hands on the hips, we're energetically wrapping outer left hip forward, outer right hip back. Low back is getting long. Frontal hip bones are lifting up. Keep your back leg so straight and strong, and then lift your arms up. Warrior One. I will say this is not a very easy pose. I think it's actually a really hard pose, but we're just exploring the dynamics of it. So the right foot is straight forward. We're bending the front knee. We're moving in the direction of a neutral pelvis. It might not be all the way there, and actually never will be exactly there in this pose, and that's fine, but we're going in that direction. And then just bring your hands to your hips. And step, step, step your left foot forward. Feet are hip distance. Find your Tadasana, mountain pose. Maybe close your eyes. Come back to your breath. Notice how you feel. Waking the body up more and more. That warrior one pose is a great prep for back bend. You probably felt the back leg, the front thigh is really stretching a lot. So that's good to help open up the low back and lengthen the low back. All right, so from here, we're just gonna switch sides. So you're gonna start with your feet hip distance, step your right foot back. And again, if you're wanting to do classic heel to heel, totally fine. I would recommend your feet hip distance apart, especially if you're newer to the practice. It just gives you way more space, way more support. So feet are hip distance, walking on railroad tracks. Your back foot is at an angle. With your hands onto your hips, we're moving the outer right hip forward, pulling the outer left hip back. But then just notice how my right heel wants to lift, probably yours too. Try to keep grounding through the outer right foot, the right heel, and strengthening the right leg. So there are these kind of like pushing and pulling in two different directions, all these different directions in the body. Keeping the outer right foot grounded, right hip forward, left hip back. Pull the frontal hip bones up, the tailbone down, and then bend your front knee. And you don't even need to, necessarily get right on top of the ankle, just as long as it's not past your ankle. We are moving in the direction of a 90-degree bend. It doesn't ever have to be there, but that's the direction we're going towards. And then still with the hands on the hips, notice I want to roll to my outer left foot here. I need to remind myself to ground through the inner foot. So just kind of noticing those little details of your posture, of your body. Moving towards the neutral pelvis. Bending the front knee, and then maybe if you feel supportive, reach your arms up to the ceiling. Engage your arms, reach through your fingertips. This is warrior one. Low back is long, core is working, back leg is super straight and strong. One more inhale. And then exhale, just release the hands to the hips. Step, step, step your right foot forward. So your feet are hip distance apart. And then give yourself a moment in this neutral place in Tadasana, mountain pose. So we're balancing the left and the right side of the body. We're grounding down. We're lifting up. It's almost like you're radiating in all directions energetically. Great. All right. One more standing pose here. You're going to grab hold of your two blocks. Just like we did earlier, you're going to move your two blocks at their highest heights underneath your shoulder heads. And then you're going to bring your hands onto those blocks. Okay. So we're kind of bringing everything together here. We're in that Ardha Uttanasana, the half forward fold. And you can bend your knees, right? Actually do. Bend your knees at least a little. And then just notice, though, are you rounding in your low back? Are you overly arching in your low back? Can you find that neutral place, the lengthening of your low back? One long line of energy from the tailbone to the crown of the head. Like we did in the beginning of the practice, you're going to slow motion begin to straighten your left leg behind you. Only to the degree that you can keep your pelvis neutral. So you're lengthening your low back. No flaring up, no rounding. We're lengthening the low back and moving the left leg back behind us. Maybe it's in alignment with your left hip, maybe it's not. Then notice how the outer right hip wants to kind of pop out to the right wall and wrap forward. Can you feel your outer right hip wrap to the back of the room and hug in? Your outer left hip wants to roll up. The toes want to open to the left. So think about wrapping the outer left hip down to the floor and the inner thigh up. If you feel pretty strong, maybe reach your right arm forward in space. Reaching from the left heel to your right fingertips. Very long line of energy. Can you feel Tadasana in your body? Except for your left hand and your right foot and your right leg. Then lower your right foot down and your left foot down. Do a little bit of a wiggle with your legs. Let go of that. Go ahead and just bend your knees and fold over your legs for a moment. You can forget about the blocks right now. Maybe clasp opposite elbows for a little bit more weight. You can do a gentle kind of little sway, little dangle. All right, switching sides. Hands onto your blocks. Bend the knees at least a little bit. Can you lengthen your spine? Feel the connection of the core. No like chilling out here. We're feeling the work that we found in Tadasana. Frontal hip bones to the ribs, low back is long, shoulders are shrugging down the back, chest is open. Keeping the left knee a little bit bent, slow motion, we're going to reach the right leg back behind us. And then just noticing, bring your mind's eye to your pelvis. What's happening with your hips? What's happening with your low back? So we're lifting from the inner right thigh to the ceiling. We're wrapping the outer right hip down because it loves to wrap up. And then feeling this outer left hip wrap back in space. Warrior 3. And then can you try to keep your chest open, pulling forward in space, just like we did in Ardha Uttanasana, the half forward fold we did earlier. Now just with one leg behind us. All right, lots of work with the frontal hip bones towards the ribs. Maybe, just maybe, you reach your left arm forward. Maybe you don't. Totally up to you. This is something you can come back to. And then lower your left palm down, and then lower your right foot down. Ooh. Give yourself a little wiggle. Probably feeling that in the left hip and the left hip flexor. Bend the knees a good amount, and just fold over your legs. Give yourself a moment. Hanging upside down. Breathing into the forward fold. You can move the blocks to the side. Inhale, come up halfway. Bend the knees a little bit, hands on your shins, just like kind of where we left off. And then exhale, step back into downward facing dog. A moment in down dog to lengthen the spine, to reach the heels or the feet to the floor, to move the legs a little bit straighter and stronger. Can you feel Tadasana in downward facing dog? Can you feel the kneecaps lifting up, the quads lifting up? Look at your feet. Are the toes out? Are the toes in? Can you feel that same, like straight forward of the foot? Middle of the foot, from the middle of the heel to the middle of the five toes, straight forward in space, just like Tadasana. And then plank pose. All right, you might need to kind of sneak the feet back a smidge. Your shoulders are right over the wrists. The hips are low in alignment with the shoulders and the heels. Can you feel Tadasana here? Are your hips higher and the tailbone flaring up? Are your hips sagging down to the floor? Can you truly find one long line of energy from the heel of the foot to the knees, to the hips, to the shoulders, to the crown of the head, just like Tadasana. Legs are straight and strong, low back is long, and your chest is open. So you're rolling the shoulders down your back, your chest is open. Plank pose, very similar to Tadasana. That's just a different relativity to gravity, right? But we're revealing the strength of the front body. And then tap your knees down, hips to your heels, forehead to the floor. And take a moment just to soften, child's pose. Come back to your breath. A couple more long breaths. Roll yourself on up to sitting. And then swivel your legs forward in space. We're going to reach the legs in front of us and find Dandasana, staff pose, which is like Tadasana but sitting. So your feet are hip distance apart like we've been exploring with Tadasana. You're flexing through your feet. And then just notice like the tendency is for like the outer foot to kind of wrap forward. Can you wrap the outer foot towards you so you're truly fanning through your feet? And if you are noticing already that your spine is rounding, that just means you have tighter hamstrings, no worries. Bend your knees a little, maybe even a lot, that's fine. But flex through your feet. And then from this place, maybe even bring your hands on your hips. What's happening? Are you leaning forward? Are you leaning back? Can you try to find that neutral pelvis so you're grounding straight down through your sitting bones, just like we found in the very beginning of the practice when we were sitting on that block on our shins. And then can you lift straight up through the crown of the head? And you can use your hands like a little kickstand here. Bring finger pads, like finger pads, bending the elbows a little bit more. It helps me find a little bit more space. You're lifting and lengthening through the crown of the head. So can you feel Tadasana, mountain pose, in this pose. We're just sitting here, staff pose. Dandasana. One more breath here, maybe even closing your eyes. Can you find that neutral pelvis? Notice if you're pushing more forward into the frontal sit bones or the back sitting bones. Can you press straight down, lift straight up? And then from this place, we'll just bend the knees. Roll ourselves down onto our backs. Keeping the knees bent, walk your feet a little bit wider and your knees to touch. So your low back is long and spacious. We're just giving ourselves a couple of poses here to let go of the practice we just did. But even here, you can still find little tidbits of Tadasana, right? Keeping your spine long here. Noticing if you're overly arching or overly rounding in your low back. And then go ahead and hug your knees into your chest. Maybe a little rock from side to side, just to massage your low back to the floor. And then we're going to come into a gentle twist, just to release from all those standing poses. You're going to push your hips to the right and enter two, and then roll your knees over to the left. The reason why we're pushing our hips to the right a little bit is so that the hips stay in alignment with the shoulders, and so we can really roll to the outer left hip. And then revolve your chest open to the right with your right shoulder grounding towards the floor. And then we're here for a couple of long breaths. Just softening into the twist. And then slowly come back through center. You can move your feet to the floor so you can push your hips over to the left a couple of inches. So you can roll your knees over to the right. And then revolve your chest open to the left. A couple of long breaths here to soften. And then you'll slowly come back through center. Moving the hips so that they're right in the middle of the mat. And just bring the soles of your feet together and your knees wide. We're just going to give the hips a little bit of love for the work that they've done. So soles of the feet together, knees wide. You can totally bring those blocks, come over to yourself, and bring them right underneath your outer thighs for a little bit of support. That's absolutely an option. We're just going to be here for 5 to 7 breaths. Softening into the inner thighs and outer hips. Okay, and then from there, you're just going to straighten your legs in front of you. Just make sure your blocks are, kind of far away from you. Not necessarily far away from you, but they're not touching your body at all now. Reach your legs in front of you and just allow the feet to splay open now. Have your arms on either side of you, palms facing up. This is almost even like a very, very soft, chilled out Tadasana, just on our backs. But already even here, again, my body is overly bendy. So my low back wants to kind of be overly arching here. So for me, I would lift my hips up and lengthen my tailbone down, away from my shoulders, and then lower my hips back down. So I just gave myself my own little adjustment so my low back is longer, right? Maybe that actually feels better for you and your body. Feel that out. If your shoulders feel like they're kind of still hunching, then maybe you kind of roll your shoulder blades underneath you so your chest feels open. So kind of similar adjustments that we did in Tadasana when we were active. Now they can just be a little adjustment, and then we can be passive and just soften into it. And then go ahead and inhale deeply into your nose. Open your mouth, exhale, sigh it out of the mouth. And then with every moment, see if you can just totally soften and surrender more. We did a good amount of work today. Now can you meet that work with doing nothing at all? Giving your body a moment to take in all the work you've just done. Letting your mind move towards a place that's a little bit more still and calm and quiet just for this moment. The more you can let go and relax physically, energetically, and mentally, the more good you can take in from the practice we just did. And you can stay here, relaxing, taking the practice as long as you like. Thank you for practicing. Namaste.